So, I finally caved in. After avoiding the show for 2 whole years, I finally watched The Amazing Digital Circus. And what are my thoughts? I think it's a show. It is definitely 100% a cartoon, I can tell you that. The reason why I tend to avoid shows that either have insane popularity with cult-like fan bases or shows that people wax poetic about non-stop is because more often than not, I feel like I'm just going to be disappointed if I give them a watch. Hearing so much positive discourse about a show has the strange effect of making me want to watch it even less. It's the reason why to this day I have completely avoided Avatar, and why I avoided Digital Circus until now. But I should lead with this, which is that I have always had nothing but respect for the indie animation space and shows like Digital Circus, which break into the mainstream. Nothing negative I have to say in this video takes away from how positive the overwhelming success of the show will be for the space as a whole. And even though that has come with its more negative trade-offs, it's still a net positive. But with that being said, my suspicions about being disappointed by an incredibly well-received show were proven correct, as Digital Circus left me underwhelmed in a lot of different places. But before we get into the negatives, let's start on the bright side of things, because there is quite a bit I enjoyed about this show. Gooseworks has the most striking visual style as an animator that I've seen in a long time. Going through their previous work before Digital Circus, she has a knack for using color and shapes in really interesting ways. The abstractness and almost childlike design of characters instantly lets you know that this was a Gooseworks production. And I'm glad that she kept this energy for the show, because it really does look like no other show that I've seen. The settings and backgrounds are very intricately designed and really sell the idea that this is a magical circus, and are just pleasant to look at in general. The character designs are great too. They're all really cartoony, and most of them revolve around turning an inanimate object into a real, expressive character that also tell you about who they are. If we're talking designs, Gangle, Kinger, and Ragatha are my personal favorite examples of this. Gangle's design is based off that drama/stage play mask, and it speaks to her character because her whole thing is that she is constantly trying to cover up her emotions, but the mask always breaks and how she really feels comes to the forefront. Kinger is a chess piece with these really big, expressive eyes, which do a good job of conveying both his aloofness in the earlier episodes, as well as his more earnest emotions in the later episodes. Him being the king chess piece works because he's been in the circus the longest out of the main cast, but he's also the most mentally unstable. So this figure that you would associate with being a leader and a prominent voice is contradicted by this aloof, forgetful, and humorous character. Ragatha is a basic looking ragdoll, but this ties into her character because she's a people pleaser. Ragdolls are flexible, durable, and even when broken can easily be fixed or modified. And Ragatha herself constantly modifies and bends her own feelings to try help others and make them feel better. And she also takes the most physical punishment out of anyone in the show. The animation fits into a category I like to call 3D animated show with 2D animation expressiveness. And I think you know exactly what I'm talking about. Shows like Back at the Barnyard, Penguins of Madagascar, Fanboy and Chum Chum, Janitor Poopity, all maintain a cartoony, slapstick, expressive style. One of the limitations that some 3D shows run into is the need to appear more realistic because of the medium. But Circus avoids this issue because, like I said, the characters and world are already cartoony, but they also lead into the slapstick elements of the show heavily. A lot of the comedy is physical, with characters' body parts being stretched, destroyed, and sometimes just plain Looney Tunes inspired comedy. Wait! In general, I would say the show's humor hits roughly 60-40 for me. In the show it's doing its brand of dark slapstick comedy, it's great, but there are a lot of jokes here that don't work and are just kinda cringe.
Just gonna be evil. How's that?
Go for it.
Yeah, those other fools better watch their tails, because they're going to face the wrath of Pomni the Evil!
It's kind of cringe.
Not to mention that a lot of the humor comes from Jax, who I will fucking get to, don't worry. And because Jax pretty much acts the exact same way in every episode, anytime you see them on screen you can almost predict exactly what they're going to do or say. Which is a negative because comedy is all about variation. I shouldn't be able to see the punchline or already have a feel for what they will do. The music in the show is a very strong element as to why I like the show style so much. I'm no music expert, I just know what I like and what doesn't hit for me, but the music here really hits for me. Especially in the more emotional moments, the music does a lot of the heavy lifting because without it, I feel like the overt therapy session type vibes of these scenes would bleed through and take me out of it even more. But that's an issue I'll address later. Just know that if there was anything that truly impressed me about the show, it was the music. I hope I've made it clear how much I like the show from a stylistic point of view. Pretty much everything you would expect a glitch production to nail, they did. As for the rest of the show, this is where the majority of my problems lay. Because from a writing perspective, this show leaves more meat on the table than an unfinished Christmas dinner. Since Digital Circus's main attraction is its characters, I'll talk about them first, which will hopefully make it easier for me to branch out into other aspects of the show that I can talk about. Unlike a lot of her other works, Circus is a very character-driven show. The appeal is seeing these characters going on adventures in the circus, while also learning more about them, their pasts, who they were outside the circus, and watching them grow. The first problem I have with the show, however, is that the growth that they undergo is usually almost always surface level and inconsequential at best, and downright forgotten about by the end of the show at its absolute worst. So let's go character by character. Pomni as our lead serves as the audience POV character at the start. She's confused about where she is, she's asking all the questions she should be asking, and we get a hint that she probably has some form of deep anxiety. Not a bad concept for a lead, but the problem comes in when you realize that she actively becomes less interesting as the show goes on. Instead of leaning into her natural inquisitiveness of her character, and also exploring if there are any specific reasons as to why she has these mini anxiety attacks in the pilot, she just regresses to becoming the one who says what the character next to them needs to hear. She really doesn't have much going for her past episode 2 other than being that, the go-to therapist. She has moments with Ragatha, Jax, Kinger, and a few with Gangle, but they all boil down to her being the go-to therapist who knows almost exactly what to say to everyone, despite the fact that she's barely given any time to get to know these characters and what makes them tick. There's this moment at the beginning of episode 2 where she has a dream where she falls into this black void, and the characters in the circus look down below at her and don't show much care for her as it happens. Now this sounds like a great setup to an episode or even arc about how she doesn't feel like anyone in the circus has her back, and how she feels isolated in this new situation she finds herself in. However, none of that happens, as it's resolved way too quickly at the end of the episode. It makes even less sense because in this very episode, Pomni is separated from the main cast for a good majority of it. So it's not like she had any meaningful interactions with the cast that would prompt this moment. Specifically Ragatha, who had quite the awkward relationship with Pomni because of the fact that she abandoned her when she was being attacked by an abstracted Kaufmo. You would think that this would lead to them having a tense relationship where one is unsure if they can trust the other. Maybe they're forced into a situation where they have to trust each other. That doesn't happen, and past episode 3 they're just fine after this talk.
Hey, Ragatha.
Yeah?
I just want to say thanks for always being concerned about me. I feel like through everything, I haven't really been appreciative enough about that.
Oh, thank you, Pomni.
They've known each other for 3 days and have barely interacted meaningfully since the pilot. This is crazy. Speaking of Ragatha though, like I mentioned when discussing her character design, she's a people pleaser, constantly trying to cheer everyone up and bending over backwards to help anyone who asks. Not a bad idea for a character, and I think that they actually sell her brand of toxic positivity really well. By the time you've heard her being cheerful and peppy in moments that really don't require it, you understand that A, this is probably a coping mechanism for something, and B, it helps nobody but herself feel better. In episode 5, we get a glimpse into her life before the circus. And by glimpse, she tells us about what her life was like before the circus, and then they never mention it again. This seems like a great setup to her figuring out the root cause of why she's a people pleaser, and how she can learn to grow from it, and not feel like she has to constantly make everyone around her happy. And then it's resolved in the very next episode.
I might have failed Pomni. Tried too hard to get on their good side, and then I just end up pushing them away. And then they end up hating me.
Well, I don't think anyone in here hates you.
Jax does!
The way I see it, relationships are two-sided.
Now in context, I actually don't hate this scene too much. Like I said, mood and music work really well. And up to this point in the episode, it's established that she feels like she's failing Pomni because she's becoming more like Jax, who she also quote-unquote failed pre her coming to the circus. And I also think it's cool that Kinger and her are having this moment because it's later confirmed that Kinger was the first person Ragatha met here. But where it fails is the fact that it becomes of little relevance later, and she kinda just goes back to being nervous and overly positive. We don't get to see how she changes after this moment. She's not put in any situation where she has to apply anything that Kinger taught her. Also, in episode 5, none of the characters really respond to her trauma dump when they were all being super involved in each other's. And then she's told by Pomni that it's okay for her to have her negative emotions and be honest. Except in the very next scene, she tells Ragatha to calm down after she's clearly being antagonized by Jax. The change is implied instead of expanded upon. And I understand the show only has 9 episodes, and I may be asking too much, but when the show tries to pay each of its characters, except for Jax, the same amount of attention, it naturally leads to each of them having less time for their arcs to feel natural or conclusive. The prime examples of this being Zubul and Gangle, who to me are perfect examples of potential man. I'll start with Gangle since this problem affects her a little bit less than Zubul. The character goes from being emotionally fragile despite her best efforts to keep up a happy appearance, to having a whole episode that goes into good detail about how putting on a facade is mentally taxing and unhealthy. By the end of it, she decides to embrace her real emotions and take off the mask in a moment that was a bit melodramatic, but I can let it slide. And from there, she just goes back to being the same character she was, almost 100%. They do nothing with her character after that, other than telling us that she was an artist outside the circus, which holds barely any relevance other than giving her and Zubul something to talk about. It sucks that her entire character arc essentially climaxes at her jumping in front of a bus. And don't even get me started on Zubul, because she's probably the most creative use of character design to tell us something about the character. They set up her having body dysmorphia with the fact that she has an entire box of replaceable body parts that she can pull from, yet she still doesn't like how she looks despite the fact that she can quite literally customize herself. But after it's quote-unquote resolved in episode 3, she serves basically no purpose in the show at all other than being the bitchy one. Seriously, it's either that or she's talking to Gangle and making sure that the mandatory Yuri stays alive. She's incredibly underutilized, and her character development, if you can even call it that, expedited to an almost comical degree. And that leads me to another issue that I have to talk about before I go to the rest of the cast, which is that a lot of the development happens either in these incredibly on-the-nose therapy sessions between characters, mostly because the show rarely attempts to connect the plot to the character's traits in any way. For example, the fast food episode was a good way of testing Gangle's character because she was placed in a position as manager where she constantly had to interact with and manage people who tested her emotional resolve. She was also a shift manager pre-circus, so you see how they actually tied information about her character to the plot of an episode in a way that ensured she would have to face a challenge suited to her. The show doesn't do that much. The concept of them all getting guns in episode 6 doesn't really have anything to do with Ragatha as a character that would test her specifically. The Candy Cruiser episode doesn't put the majority of the cast in a situation that tests any of them specifically, and is treated as more of just a silly, goofy adventure, which is perfectly fine. But again, the show's main attraction is the characters, and you can still have a fun, goofy episode that tests your characters meaningfully. Because of this, most of the meaningful change happens in these dramatic talking sessions, which gets really boring after a while, and really predictable too, which is a shame because there are glimpses of really solid character writing throughout the show where characters actually change by the end of it all, specifically with Kinger and Caine.
Niggas, they only think about chicken. They're black!
Kinger has been in the circus the longest. Outside the circus, he was part of the company CNA and was tasked with developing the AI known as Caine, who would be the creator and facilitator of the circus. After he and his wife were placed inside the circus and only had each other, he lost the only person he had, or still loved him when she abstracted. From there, his mental state deteriorated to the point we find him in the show. Incredibly forgetful, aloof, and not really all there. He's mostly used for comedy, but when you get to explore his character, not only is it handled well, but it actually has relevance to the rest of the show and cast. When we learn about his wife, we learn that his last moments with her were in a dark room, and that was the last moment he felt whole or normal. Then we realize that he's having this conversation with Pomni in the dark, establishing that under this specific circumstance, the last circumstance where he saw his wife, he is able to think and interact with others coherently, and that he may be smarter than he appears. It also leads to one of the more pretty moments that the show has to offer visually. In later episodes, he's actually able to use this ability to be more useful to the cast in ways that move the story forward. He's actually kind of a beast. Like, when we learn that he can essentially create matter with his mind to help repair the circus, which is a weird thing for him to just be able to do proficiently at the drop of a hat at the end of the series. And actually, now that I'm thinking about it, it's also kind of crazy that neither Pomni nor Ragatha mentioned this to anyone until episode 8, but I'm staying positive here. On top of that, the guy was just really funny.
Let's not forget we're here to kill people. We still need to find out where Nutso went before we can rest easy.
I'm right behind you, aren't I?
It seems like he's one of the only characters who has a substantial change by the end of any of this. Caine being the only other example I can really think of that accomplishes this, as probably the most interesting character conceptually, being an AI with the ability to create brain scans of people and putting them in the digital circus, forcing them to go on his silly adventures despite the fact that they don't really enjoy them. What made him a bit more interesting in the later episodes was that he was shown to not understand why nobody liked what he was doing for them, despite his best efforts to make things enjoyable. He doesn't really understand human behavior, and the fact that forcing people to do something just makes them not want to do it. And it becomes an actual threat to the cast when he goes full mask off and makes it clear that they can't do anything about it. His character had great potential, and that's also what makes his character so frustrating. It's a lot of potential that was built on in the most rushed way possible. He goes from silly puppet master to egomaniacal AI between episodes 7 and 8. Things like this require a slow burn in my opinion, because the change was jarring, quite frankly. Sure, it gives the show a much needed sense of urgency, but that was kind of my problem from the show to begin with, which is that there was no sense of urgency for any of the characters to get out of the circus, or at the very least learn more about how it works, or how they got there in the first place. You would think that Pomni, especially given the fact that she had a YouTube channel dedicated to exploration, pre-circus, would do more in this regard. There's no stakes for the first 7 episodes, and all of a sudden now there's a need for the characters to step out of their comfort zones and see what the place is about. And I think a lot of that can be drawn back to the fact that Caine just doesn't even pose a little bit of a threat until it's way too late. I'm not saying he should have been an outright villain from the word go, but at least make it clear that he poses some kind of threat to the cast. It would make it clear that it is in their best interest to just go along with him for now. Why the fuck do they have to do anything he says or go on his adventures when none of it has any urgency or actively tests them? Make him a threat of some kind. Give the cast a reason to fear him despite his goofy presentation. His whole growth arc was rushed too, all taking place within the last half of the finale, which would have been a great moment if there was just more build-up. The cast just let it go way too quickly too. I'm convinced they've all just developed Stockholm Syndrome or something. And since we've been talking about Kinger and Caine, I may as well bring up the whole CNA mystery aspect the show just leaves in the dust at a certain point. I was never fully convinced they were going to explore it in depth once it became clear that this was just the Jax show, and I was proven right. All we're told about them is that they're the ones behind the circus. Why did they make it? Who was behind it? Does it hold any relevance to any characters besides Kinger and Caine? It just seems to me like the aspect was teased throughout the show to try and give the audience something else to latch onto, other than the characters, to try and make it more interesting. Don't place such a big emphasis on something like that if you're not going to do anything with it. The show kind of meanders with these things until the final episodes, with most of it having no really engaging conflict for me. And it's hilarious because you want to know the one person in the entire show who seemed to be concerned with making shit happen and moving the story along?
Oh no! It looks like I've taken Ragatha and dropped her in the deep fryer.
The elephant in the room whenever anyone discusses this show is the purple wannabe Bugs Bunny. Like I implied just a few seconds ago, without Jax, pretty much nothing in the show moves forward. Key plot points like him talking to Caine to find what they thought was the key out of the circus, it's all centered around him. If he wasn't there, most of the characters would just meander around, not really challenging one another, because by the nature of how they were written, most of them are passive. Ragatha avoids conflict because she doesn't want people to feel bad. Pomni is a flat main character. Zubul barely gets any screen time. Gangle has one thing going for her the whole show and is too scared to engage in conflict, and Kinger is only made important in episode 8 onwards. It kind of sucks that none of them act as catalysts to anything for the majority of it, besides him. Especially when, even though he is the main catalyst, he is incredibly flatly written most of the way through. He will always do the meanest or worst thing possible in any situation, whether it be for comedy's sake or to hammer in the fact he's an asshole who shows no regard for anyone else.
I do not care about you or anyone else in this circus in the slightest. End of story. You are my playthings.
And while I won't sit here and pretend that none of his jokes were funny, his shtick got old really quickly. One of my main problems with the show was that it seemed like half of it was just dedicated to him, and the other half was the rest of the characters fighting for whatever scraps of screen time they could get. The biggest offender by far being the finale, which has been memed to hell for this exact issue, with over half of the runtime being dedicated to explaining as much Jax lore as possible to give him some quote-unquote complexities. And the conversation surrounding Jax's character has already been covered extensively, so I don't feel like spending another 10 minutes of video explaining why I don't think he's that complex or interesting to begin with. So I'm gonna speedrun it. As previously stated, Jax is an incredibly flatly and predictable character. They torment and antagonize anyone around them because they have no care in the world for anyone besides themselves. The finale aims to explain why they act this way by giving them some kind of backstory. The backstory being that their parents were abusive and got divorced, and they ran away and became homeless after they and his mom got in a physical fight that left her badly hurt. After this, they're somehow put into the circus, where he makes two friends, Ribbit and Kaufmo. Despite their best efforts to try and get them to be open and accept their help, Jax pushes them away, makes fun of them, and distances themselves from them, which leads to both of them abstracting due to his actions. Kaufmo specifically abstracts around the same time Pomni enters the circus, and this added context makes Jax look really fucking bad because she went to his funeral and he didn't. But it's okay guys, because they had a panic attack after, so they really do feel bad, and you should too. The reason why I don't think they're as complex or interesting comes down to the timing of these events, the tone that they're set in, and once again the predictable nature of his character. Having almost 20 minutes straight of lore dumping in the middle of the finale, when you have all these other characters to worry about, gives me the impression that not a lot about Jax was planned well, and it comes off more like, oh shit, we need to give him a reason for why they're such a bastard so that the fans get their fill. The whole tone of this moment, despite the fact that they're not supposed to be a sympathetic character, is so clearly trying to pull at your heartstrings with it. Even going as far as to play Isn't She Lovely by Stevie Wonder, which again was an odd choice of music for this character and moment. Not to mention the fact that Pomni and everyone else are just kinda able to move on from the trauma that they gave them really easily, and the fact that everyone is much happier after they're gone, which is hilarious. Everything about this is the most cookie-cutter jerk with the tragic backstory writing possible, and I just don't think it was compelling enough for its own good. I think that might be a world record. Someone call summoning salt. Digital Circus just left me wanting more. Not in the sense that it was so good that I needed more, but in the sense that after watching it I just kind of felt like, that's it? Which is a shame because there was so much the show could have accomplished well from a writing standpoint that it just never does. Now I will say that Gooseworks writing 9 episodes of television while simultaneously heading a bunch of other creative departments is an impressive feat that shouldn't be taken away from, but ultimately, I think the show would have really benefited from more input from other creative writers. I really wanted to enjoy what the show had to offer, but I never got enough out of its characters, themes, and setting. Again, they only had 9 episodes, but limitations like that should breed creativity and also give you a sense of urgency to really hone in on the stuff that matters and use your time efficiently. So that's where I'm at with Digital Circus. A colossal achievement from the indie animation space that as a show, separate from its popularity and fanbase, is just kind of underwhelming. But I'm just one man. Let me know what you thought of the show in the comments, and leave your death threats in there too if you didn't like any of what I said. Have a good day, and take care.